Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We're hoping you'll let us know where you think we got it right and where we totally missed the point, which you can do by visiting unsilentpodcast.com. Now let's get into it. So what are we talking about today, Brian?
Well, we're talking about what could be, you can make a pretty compelling case. It's the American story. We're talking about race and race relations, and it's maybe the most taboo subject of all to talk about, but it's arguably the most important also. So we're gonna do our best to get into it and see if we can't figure some stuff out.
Let's do it.
So, from my perspective, looking at my short life on this planet in the grand scheme of things, we kind of hit a pinnacle in around 2008 with the election of Barack Obama. For me personally, like, I don't know about everybody else, but for me personally, that was like one of the moments where, as an American citizen, I was like, man, we did it. We jumped the hurdle. Like we crossed this bridge. Like we've done it, and we can move on and like get to other things instead of talking about this topic and not really ever seeming like we're making progress. I know there was tons of progress made before I was born and when I was very young and too little to know what was going on. I mean, there's the entire American story has been making progress on this topic, it feels like, but it kind of felt like it was the pinnacle in, like, this proved that we had grown up, or we had like matured, or we like moved past all this stuff. And then in the 15 years since then, it feels to me like the pendulum has swung completely the other way, and things are maybe worse than they've been in, I don't know, 60 years. I'm sure that it's not as bad as it feels, but to me, it feels like things are not great. It's a topic that is talked about incessantly, and it feels like we just don't make progress. It feels like some people don't want to make progress. There's a million things going on here, and trying to cram all this into a short little podcast is maybe even foolish, but you and I cannot be sincere about trying to talk about things going on and like skip this one. This is, arguably the most important thing we could ever talk about, and we'd be foolish to not even include it. So, I guess that's where we start. Well, first of all, do you feel the same way? Like, do you feel like that we kind of made progress and kind of went backwards? Like, what do you feel?
Well, yeah, I have a little bit of a cynical point of view on it, because I think, well, we did make the progress, and while his election did show that this is obviously not objectively a country that's so race obsessed that we couldn't elect somebody who wasn't white, I think what's happened as a result of that is primarily in the media and in political circles, that topic wasn't let go because it's too powerful a topic to let be okay. I would guess the majority of people that I know now, I'm involved with people of all different races, colors, sizes, ages, etc., as I'm sure you are in your daily life. And I don't experience, now somebody might say, well, you're just a white guy, so what do you know?
You wouldn't know if you did.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't see a lot of interpersonal, relational, racial animosity between people that I encounter. I just don't see it happening. The place that I do see it happening is primarily in the media stage and on the national stage. And I think, this might be one where people want to tell me I'm wrong, I think a lot of it is because it's such a powerful topic. It can be used to raise money, and it can be used to gain power. I mean, whenever anything happens and it's viewed through a racial lens, it has much more intensity to it. And as a result of that, those that would use the topic to drive their own agendas are definitely not going to let it go. So I think there's both of those things. I think on one side, it's as good as I've ever seen it in my lifetime, because everybody seems to get along with everybody else. On the flip side of that, it's as bad as I've ever seen it in my lifetime, because of the competing narratives. Not even the competing realities, but the competing narratives. Now, that's not to say that there aren't differences in outcome, et cetera, that we got to think about these things. But just in terms of how people get along, that's the way I see it. I see those two separate realities coming into conflict in the real world.
Yeah. I think that you're so right that this is the biggest hammer that can be swung maybe for any society on the planet.
Yeah,
If you're in China, you don't have to worry about this. If you're in Korea, you don't have to worry about this. If you're in Russia, you don't, by and large, have to worry about this. If you're from Brazil, like we're there's a handful of countries that have to face this. And when I mean face it, I mean like there's obviously some ugly history. There's obviously tons of progress. There's obviously things that are attributed to race and things that have happened that are not attributed to race that get kind of swept in there because it's convenient. There's all these hodgepodge of things going on. And I think that people are, they don't like it. They want it to go away. They want to solve this problem. And it does feel like at times there are forces at work to keep that from happening. So I just have a handful of questions for you here. And I think that some of these things we get so hung up in the details that we just forget like basic human things. So I'm going to run a few things by you here
sure.
and just see what you think here. So either my notion is one of them is either we accept that we are all the same and we all have the same tendencies, or we are not. And I mean tendencies like we generally behave the same way. Either we accept that whether you're white, brown, black, or whatever, that we're either the same in how we're, the creature we are is the same, or
Right,
it's not, right?
right,
It feels like that piece is lost, and when we get into these details about things, it kind of feels like we start pulling away from that notion. So I don't know anybody who wouldn't agree with that. Like fundamentally, deep down, we're kind of the same, and I choose to
right.
believe that. So, and the other thing is like if we all had the exact same skin pigmentation, do we think everything would be okay, or do we think we would find different things that were different about each other to then focus on those things? What do you think?
I'm going to relate a story that goes directly to that. So there's without bringing anybody into the conversation who hasn't asked to be in the conversation, but um, I know some folks that are African. They're here, but they are African, and they're
Right.
here to work and start businesses and other things. And I was talking to one of these folks the other day, and this person was is from East Africa, and there's folks from West Africa, and she's very open about racial things because she finds the United States very strange that we have these
Yeah.
different kinds of animosities. And
Right.
she said, but I can understand this because um, in the place that she comes from, there's these people. They're all black. They're all African and they're all black.
Yep.
There's these people that are the darker skinned, and there's
Yep.
these people that are the lighter skinned, and there's some animosity between the two of them.
Right.
So even though they're all basically the same, there's this thing going on. She says this is the closest thing we've got to this kind of thing you all have here, which we find very strange. So that to me goes to the fundamental point that that to your first point, that we are all human, and in fact I think the solution to racial problems is understanding that our shared humanity. That's really what there are
Yeah.
differences, but there's shared humanity, then there's cultural and other things like that. But the other thing that my experience tells me is, having traveled a number of places in the world, wherever you go, somebody hates their neighbor wherever
Yeah.
you go. So there was one year that I just happened to be in Southern Europe, in not even in European Union, but in Macedonia and in the European Union, Greece, and
Yeah.
there's great animosity between the Macedonians and the Greeks, even though they're ethnically the same people. There's great animosity. They don't like each other because they disagree about where Alexander the Great was born 2,500 years ago.
Right.
And in fact, I almost got into a
Yeah.
fight about that. Almost got into a physical fight. Getting these Greek guys were coming after us because they thought I was from Macedonia, and they didn't like that. So the next year, I was in the Baltic states in Northern Europe, and the same exact angst and animosity between the Baltics and the Russians, and the Russians that lived in the Baltics and the Baltics that were invaded by Russia, and so they had bad feelings with them. The Russians that were a minority felt bad about them. Everywhere I've gone, across the planet, somebody's mad at their neighbor because
Yeah.
that's who we are as humans.
Yeah, it would be. I think I would liken it to if the Civil War in the United States had not been resolved the way it was, and we were reunified. We ended up two different countries.
Yeah.
I'm going to hazard a guess we wouldn't like each other very much.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because
Right.
that's the human the human thing is to make ourselves feel better by denigrating somebody else.
Yeah.
And unfortunately that can be racial, it can be all sorts of different
Religious.
things. Religious, ethnic,
Yeah. Income, physical
age.
ability. Yeah, age. Again, if we all had exactly like to the millionth percentile, exact same skin pigmentation, we would still find ways to differentiate ourselves over
Absolutely.
religion, power, economics, education. Like the list. I don't know. If I really spent some time, I could probably come up with, I'm going to guess 25 things that we would like substantively find a way to disagree with each other about, and to point out how we are different. Because I think, as we've discussed previously, kind of the through line of the human story to me, forget what country we're in, forget all this race stuff. The through line is either my people have been anointed by our creator and our deity, whoever that might be, to be superior to you, and therefore we get to impose our will on you, or we have been oppressed by you, we've been the subject of you imposing your will, and now we are justified and righteous in retaliation, and therefore we are now superior to you. That's it.
Right.
I don't know a single instance in history where one of those two things is not in play. Do you? And
They're
you're like
all.
you're a
You're
history guy.
exactly right. It's exactly right. It's grievance. Everybody's got a grievance with it. Hatfields and McCoys. Well, who
Right.
started it? Who did it first? In my example, in the Baltic states, in Estonia and Latvia, and the Russian population in those countries, the Russians feel bad because they're a minority there and they get treated poorly. They believe because the Soviet Union invaded and took those countries hostage and treated them poorly.
Right.
So the Latvians feel bad, the Estonians feel bad, and they all feel bad about each other for different grievances. And the
Yeah.
same thing was true. Like the one in Southern Europe is really amusing to me because a lot of what they argue about is where Alexander the Great was born 25 centuries ago. And that's why they're mad at each other. And they do
Yeah.
silly things like wanting to change the name of the country. And almost when I was there, there was almost a riot at the American embassy because we, as America, recognized the Republic of Macedonia as the Republic of Macedonia, and the Greeks think that Macedonia belongs to them. So there you go. Everybody's mad at everybody.
Right. So if we accept the notion that the human story is one of trying to assert our superiority over somebody because either we've been aggrieved by them or we are
Right.
entitled to that for whatever reason, like that's the story, and we will choose whatever's at our disposal to separate ourselves and to find differences that we can then use to foist ourselves above somebody.
Right.
And if it wasn't skin pigmentation, it would be something obvious like religion. It would be obvious like geography. It would be there's other very obvious things that we would default to if race was not a factor. Now, all that being said, obviously, you and I are not here to dismiss the significant amounts of like egregious, horrific pain that people have gone through for a variety of things. Not the least of which is because they were a skin color that somebody else didn't like.
Right.
It seems though that we get hung up on the skin color as the thing when the skin color is not the thing. The thing is the human behavior that drives the separation and putting ourselves as superior to somebody. And when that seems like the issue, not which lever we're pulling, whether it's religion or race or economics or whatever. I can tell you as somebody who grew up poor and knew lots of poor people, I could make a pretty compelling argument that being poor is maybe one of the worst ways to be separated out because you miss out on a lot of things that way too, right? So
absolutely.
So I think the other thing is we have to acknowledge that as human beings, personally, individually, and collectively, when we're scared, when we're angry, when we're in a mode to hurt somebody, we will use whatever is at our disposal, verbally or physically, to harm people. And we do this to people we love, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
we do this to our parents, our children, our spouses, our siblings, our friends that we love. We, in a moment where we're scared or whatever, or angry or retaliating, we use the biggest club we have.
That's right. Well, we use it especially for those that are not like us in some way, whatever not like us might mean,
Right.
because we all, everybody thinks their own opinion and their own viewpoints and their own way of looking at the world is the best way of looking at the world. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's normal. I mean, you wouldn't think what you
Right.
think unless you thought it wasn't the best way to think. Um,
Right.
but therefore, that means that other, whatever other is, whatever makes somebody an other, is not quite as good, and so therefore we justify that and justify our poor treatment of somebody who is other than us, because, well, they're not quite with the program because they don't quite think or behave or look or sound or whatever like I do, and
So
that's part of that problem.
I guess what I'm getting at is it am I too pie in the sky? Am I too utopian to think that what if we just shifted the conversation from which lever we're pulling to hurt somebody and impose our superiority for whatever reason, instead of talking about which lever we pull, whether it be religion or whatever, or in this case, race? If we shifted the conversation from that to this human behavior really sucks and we should stop doing this across the board, not just this one thing, is that, am I crazy for thinking that's something that like maybe in schools or universities or political discourse or like that could be a topic instead of the Al Sharpton on this side and the other person on the other side talking about the lever we're pulling. And
Well,
again,
and
I don't want to dismiss this like I don't care about people getting hurt. That is absolutely not the case. For centuries, people have gotten hurt for all kinds of things, including this one, which is obviously really
yep.
bad.
Well, and I think the distinction that we talked about at the beginning, where people get along with everybody, people mostly get along with people that aren't like them. I mean, in our individual lives. I mean, there's these other experiences, but in general, I can walk out here and there's people of every, ethnicity, race, et cetera, and we all get along and it's just fine. So I think I think we want to do that. I think we do want to generally get along with folks. And I think on a personal level, we do. I think most of us do. Now there's
Yeah.
jerks in the world and there's bad
Yeah.
people and all that, but I think for the most part, and that's why I say that this topic is now one of two extremes. One in where we all get along much better on mostly an individual basis than we ever have before. And some people might say I'm pie in the sky, and that doesn't mean that there aren't, people that are discriminated against. But on the flip side of that, this other side, I think we have to ask, why is it that this can be pretty much true over here, and on this side it's completely the opposite? And I think really going back, for instance, to 2008, there's a few different things I think that happened there. One of them, I think there is a technological component of this, because it is very easy from the mid 2000s on, with social media, et cetera, to segment ourselves with people that are only like us.
Yeah.
And therefore, the out group who is not like us is really out. And that's why,
Yeah.
things have become so polarized. So I think there's a technological component to that. And
Yeah.
that's why, that happened. We had Obama as president, and it didn't solve everything. And that's one reason. I think the other one is the more kind of nefarious one, that since this has been a winning, strategy and a winning hammer to hit people over the head with and to get what you want for a very long time, that there's lots of folks that don't want to give that up. And so I think
Right.
there's those two things. And I think and to me, the difference between really good over here, at least my experience of interacting with lots of people over here is good, and then really bad over here, everybody thinks that we're that the KKK is going to take over, or there's going to be a race war or whatever.
Right.
I think all of that strong juxtaposition just illustrates those 2 points.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, again, not wanting to bring people into this conversation who didn't ask for this, so I'll be careful here not to divulge too much. But I will tell you on a personal level, for me, outside of my family, the person who's had the greatest impact on my life, I would call this man like my mentor professionally.
Mm-hmm.
He taught me how to be a good man, and by my standards, values and how to be responsible. In my, when I was younger, I was not super responsible all the time, and he took me under his wing and he changed my life. And I literally refer to him as a father figure. I
Yeah.
call him a name like you would call your dad.
Yeah.
25, whatever years later, he looks nothing like me. I promise you, if you put us side by side, nobody would say those guys could be father and son. I promise you,
Right.
he looks very much different than me as relating to the topic we're on today. I know that you're 100% right. And he has said to me, how you change hearts is one person at a time,
Right.
and how you get people past this stuff is one heart to another heart, touching each other's lives and helping each other,
Exactly.
and proving that whether it was your family or your neighbors or your community or whatever telling you the Macedonians are evil people and us Greeks got it right. Well, somewhere along the way, there's a Romeo and Juliet kind of thing that happens, and we find out, those guys are full of shit. It's really not like
Right.
that. We can get along,
Right.
Okay, so the next thing that I want to ask you about, and this is where I think it begins to get really sticky, and I'll be completely transparent with the audience listening. And like, this is not a fun thing to talk about, but one of the things that Dave and I set out to do was or one of our frustrations is that we're not allowed, it's not suggested to have these kinds of conversations. And some of these things are frankly not very fun to talk about. You can really, get yourself worked up. It's just not fun to talk about because the stakes are so high. But somebody has to start talking about this stuff. Otherwise, what's going to happen? I mean, it's a pretty predictable outcome, right? So I think that one of the things that gets um, conflated with race, again, besides the basic human nature stuff we just talked about, like we're all the same, we all do the same things, we use the same kinds of levers, not the exact same lever, but the same kinds of levers, and in the worst possible moments, we use the biggest club we have. So we got that kind of human nature stuff. Separate from that, though, I think there's a values thing that happens here, and I'm going to give you two different examples, and we'll talk about the first one here. So the first one is you got, and the race does not matter here. I'm going to explain these two situations, and the race does not matter. But you got, picture an inner city kid, I don't know, 15, 14, 16, whatever. No dad at home to be a role model. You got this person's, this inner city kid's attending a school that has, relative to like the suburbs, fairly harsh environment. You got you come up in a school, and you go to a school, and I've been to a couple schools like this when I was growing up. You kind of have this, you develop this, I got to get you before I get got mentality, right? So you have that, and then you're spending most of your time, because mom's working, dad's MIA for whatever reason, could be good, could be bad, whatever. Spending most time with other kids in similar situations, lots of free time on their hands at an age where kids who don't have a lot of structure and lots of free time end up doing things that are not good that unsupervised kids do. So you have that kid is going to grow up with a certain set of values. And then you have another kid who grows up in the suburbs. And this kid has two parents at home, and their parents are attending their sports things, maybe even coaching the t-ball team or the basketball team or whatever. And they're making sure homework is getting done. And they're attending a school that supports or provides a much more supportive environment than that inner city kid. And we could spend a whole another hour talking about why that is. But in this case, they're attending a school that's much more supportive, and they're spending most of their time doing very productive things, sports, bettering themselves in that arena, bettering themselves in school, learning things. Now, those two kids are going to grow up with very different values.
Right.
And the race of each kid, you could move the races around in all the possible hundreds or thousands of combinations that are possible, and the race of the kids would be the least important factor in that entire story.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think even when you find, when you look at cultural differences and different differences in outcome for different cultures, it ultimately comes down to not the race of the person. It comes down to cultural values. So, if you look at folks, there's, it's well known in the United States that folks from Asia tend to do better academically. Well, is that biological? Or I don't think it's biological. I think it's very much the culture that is, you will do well and you will stay in, and you will, to a great extent, that environment that they're immersed in helps.
Well, you and I started this whole conversation with the predicate that we're all the same. So we removed that biological difference from the onset. That's the first thing you and I talked about was
exactly.
Neither of us believe that's an issue. So it can't be that.
Exactly. And so I think that's where you find, even when, now I I don't like disparate outcome arguments because I think they're lazy and they don't really work very well. Just not very factually. They're just lazy arguments. But even if you do look at disparate outcomes, oftentimes what I think you're going to find is you're just going to find the culture. For instance, is there a father in the home? That
Right.
that does that whoever there is a biological father someplace, right? Do they value raising their kid, and do they value being involved and setting a good role, setting up themselves as a good role model? If not, then that kid has a dramatically higher chance of ending up in trouble.
It's like 22 or 23 times more likely to go to prison or something like that. If I remember right, that may not be the number, but it's significant, whatever it is.
Right. So culture, and by culture, I don't necessarily mean, it could be like in a lot of Asian cultures are very, very focused on that, but so it could be that, but culture really is surroundings, how you grow up, all of the different things that are inputs in your life.
Values, environment,
exactly,
priorities. I mean, if I brainstorm longer, I could probably come up with some other things, but what you are intentional about making sure happens.
Right.
There's certain things we're intentional about, and there's certain things we're not. And again, that kid in the inner city, you got to be intentional about being safe. And sometimes that means, you got to get somebody before they get you.
Absolutely.
And even if that's not the reality, it feels like that's the case. And that person is going to make very different decisions in life than a kid who grew up in the more supportive environment. And when they meet and they have a disagreement, if they happen to be different races,
right,
outsiders who have a reason to say so will say it's because of race and not because of the values and not because of the other stuff.
Well, and I think a lot of that too goes to that fundamental perception that we have, that and reality that we have, that those racial tensions are so high right now, because the conversation that you and I just had takes, you got to dig deeper to see why these things are happening. It's not as easy as saying this person looks like this and this person looks like that. Those make really good bumper stickers. They make really good fundraising letters. These people have this outcome because of this superficial thing of how much melanin's in their skin or the shape of their eyes or whatever else happens to be.
Right.
So that's where I think it becomes more of a marketing thing than it does anything else.
Well, it plays to one of our most basic fundamental things we've been talking about throughout our conversation so far, which is we have a desire to feel superior to other folks.
Right.
And even if we overcome that as humans, we evolve enough, or we personally develop ourselves well enough where we overcome that, we still don't want to be inferior to somebody else.
Right.
So when somebody's telling us you're inferior because of fill in the blank here, well, we've also discussed that now throughout human history, that has been enough of a predicate for me to say, well, now I'm justified in doing what I need to do.
Right.
And round she goes, and now we're right back to where we were, and we've made zero progress, except for some people have gotten to pass laws that they wanted. Some people have gotten money that they wanted. There's money in all these things that along the process, from the people who help shape the laws to the people who help enforce the laws to the people who help draft the laws and then work for companies as paid, have different roles for compliance, and like there's billions and billions of dollars along the way, and there's just nefarious people who just get off on seeing people hurt,
and those things wouldn't
rise to power.
And those things wouldn't be possible if it had been solved, or if racial tensions weren't very high. She wouldn't have all of the consultants, and you wouldn't have all of the money flowing and all of that if that were the case. But since that is the case, you do have all of these. So there's a financial component to it. I think there's one other component that we haven't talked about, and that is that there's a belonging component. So if you look at well, why do kids join gangs, for instance? Well, there's a feeling of belonging. When we all need to feel like we belong someplace. And if for whatever reason, maybe there's a historical reason or some other reason, we don't feel like we belong someplace, then we seek out places to belong. Now, belonging could also be to a grievance group. It could be like, I see on the news that everybody's mad about this. I don't really know all the details of this, but I want to be mad about that too, so I can belong. And so that's always a challenge.
Going back to my situation where I thank goodness I found the mentor I did. He literally changed my life to be much better. It wasn't that many years before that I was seeking other father-like role models, because I was a young man and I wanted that, and I didn't have it, whatever. And there was other guys I was gravitating towards, who, if I would have followed in their footsteps, I would have had very different outcomes,
Sure.
like dramatically different outcomes in life, in happiness, in I mean, there's not a single part of my life that would not have been much worse off had I followed a couple of other dudes that I was tagging around, or hanging around with. Yeah, just because you find a group doesn't mean that they're good. They're a good group, but by the standards of like not harming other people.
Well, and that again is where I think if we're going to solve some of the, if you talk about disparate outcome, or if you talk about other of the racial issues, if we try to dig towards some of the real problems that are there, then and dig beneath the surface to what's an environment like for folks to
Right.
have these experiences, and we try to work on those as opposed to just saying, platitudes and statements, then I think we can actually make some real progress. And of course, it is, as you said, it's all back to knowing folks one-on-one, because it's hard to other a person if you hang around them and if you get to know them a little bit.
Yeah, and I also think that we can't overlook the fact that there are other oppressing kinds of behaviors at play.
Yeah.
To keep people boxed into these environments that are not great,
Yeah.
that do produce bad outcomes. If you can keep poor people living in a really crappy poor part of town, and you can keep rents low there, and you can be, as your multinational corporation, employing those people and getting more profits, and the social unrest, you have to kind of maybe move along a little bit here and there, bump when it's needed to keep going in the right direction for you. If that keeps the poor people in check, because they're worried about these other things, well, they're not looking at that. They're not looking at the billions or trillions of dollars that are being made, for a handful of folks, and looking at the squalor they're living in.
Yeah, and I think that's very true. And I think it also is true that if society and government and media communicate messages that tell somebody that their entire world is against them, and you hear that drumbeat day in and day out, you can't get ahead because these people are not going to let you get ahead. Or, I mean, it's also, if you tell people you can't get ahead in this culture, part of what you're telling people is that they're not good enough. And if you just pound that into people for so long that they aren't, then most folks are going to find it very discouraging and very difficult to get out from under that. And folks are going to feel angry because they are being suppressed. And even if it's just in messaging that they're being oppressed.
Right. And they will, as we've discussed many times so far, they will then feel justified and righteous in doing something in retaliation, which somebody will see and say, aha, I told you those people were like that.
Right.
And then round and round we go again.
It's a spiral.
And somebody, whether it's somebody in media, somebody in politics, somebody has got to start leading a conversation where you say, there are times people are being harmed and oppressed for being in a group because of religion or race or economics or whatever, because somebody's out to harm them because they're in that group. Yes.
Right.
And also, sometimes people have bad outcomes in life because they make really bad choices.
Right.
How would we know which is the case? And there's zero conversation about that going on.
Right.
Like nobody will have that conversation. And I can't, other than, again, I don't want to be like tinfoil hat conspiracy guy, but like, why wouldn't people want to have that conversation? Why?
Right.
How is life easier not having that conversation and continuing on this merry-go-round of it's okay for me to hate you now, like the Kinderman X whatever book. The only way to handle past and future racism is racism today. Like, that is the most insane argument I think I've ever heard in my entire life. And adults, like grown people who are supposed to be in charge of making decisions, are not only going along with that, but they're pushing it. And I don't get it.
Well, it's easy and it's well funded. I mean, to me, that's
you're starting to sound like you're thinking like money drives everything. Like you're
kind of, sort of. I mean, because
if we go back to the notion that people want to be in power, money is a very, very effective way to establish who has power.
It's a huge motivator, and I think one of the things that people that are really concerned about this also do is they make heroes not out of the people that are out there just screaming angry rhetoric, but they make heroes out of people that have surpassed the system and whatever holds people down, people that have been successful. I mean, there's a book I read that I can hardly recommend, Making the Impossible Possible, about a guy that grew up in a pre-civil rights America, who basically was able to reach every one of his dreams, even though it was it was a black man that had reached all these different dreams, impact the world. There's organizations across the world right now that have been impacted by him that are helping. And he grew up in the inner city, didn't grow up with any kind of, benefits at all. I think we highlight people like that to show that this, it is possible and it is a realistic thing to break the stereotype and to have achievement without somebody else telling you that you can't do it, or somebody else telling you that you have to be angry all the time. That doesn't get any. We really do people a disservice if we are continually focusing on anger and past grievance. Not because past grievance is okay, not because we excuse it, but because it poisons the mind, it poisons the spirit, it poisons the will, and it prevents people more than any other thing, more than any other structure or anything else. It prevents people from achieving their full potential. Because back to the principle that we started with, and that is that humans are humans, and humans have tremendous potential, some less or more, but all humans have tremendous potential. And if we are communicating messages as a society that this group is unfavored, this group is more favored, these are oppressors, these are oppressed, if we keep going down this road of oppressors and oppressed based on race or whatever it happens to be, then we are literally, through our messaging and through what we're promoting, we're robbing people of their futures. More than anything structural, we're robbing people for the futures. And that's a crime. I mean, that's really where the evil takes place.
Yeah, I go back to I don't know what tribe it was, but one of the things I've heard attributed to a Native American tribe was casting out this notion we inherit the earth kind of thing. Their philosophy was we borrow it from our children, we don't inherit it from our parents.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And I look at that, I go, okay, if the path is going to be we're consciously and objectively and intentionally going to continue this, well, there was racism before, so we got to be racist against you, and we're going to do the exact same things we hated. The only difference is we're going to choose different heroes and villains and victims and scapegoats. That's the only thing difference. The underlying behavior will be exactly the same. We're going to leave that to our children. And guess what's going to happen to little Johnny, who's the white kid now being discriminated against or oppressed or whatever? How's he going to grow up? He's going to feel the exact same way as the kid you're talking about who's been told his whole life from 1983 to 2015 or whatever, you can't get ahead in life. We're perpetuating the same thing and handing our children that exact same thing. And I don't understand why somebody can't be mature enough and be the grown up and say, bullshit, I'm not doing this. We need to be different, because it's exactly that same pendulum cycle. We were oppressed, so now we get to oppress because we're self-righteous now, and then they get to say the same thing next generation. Why can't somebody, like, what am I missing here, Dave? Why can't somebody just be the grown up and say, enough, it stops here?
Well, I don't think people do. I think there are examples of that. I think that does happen. And the problem is that since it doesn't necessarily pay very well to do that as an organization, sorry, back to that again. I think because, what's the old thing about the news? If it bleeds, it leads. If you want to get ratings, run out and find the latest example of racism, and then you're going to find the news crew. If you want to find somebody who has broken all of the barriers that have been put in front of them, and they've made a great impact on themselves and the community around them, you're not going to find the news crew there. They're not going to show up and highlight that person as much. So we need more of that, because you're right. Anger and hate perpetuate anger and hate. Just because something is justified doesn't mean that something's good. If I'm angry because of something bad that's happened to me, what I do with what bad has happened to me is I can either turn that, sound like a motivational speaker now, I either turn that that bad thing that's happened to me into an opportunity for good and for success, or I turn that into more perpetual anger and hate. One of them is going to lead to a positive outcome, and one of them is going to lead to a negative outcome. That's what we need, and we have to overcome the societal fixation. What do you call it? You stop and gawk at a car crash, right? Because it's like, whoa, we like to see that. That's what we like to see. If we don't stop and gawk at that, if we say we're going to exceed where people say we should be, that's when you're going to have some success.
Right. So let me just try this. I haven't thought this through. So if this falls flat, I apologize. Let's just try this exercise here, because what I want to be really sincere and genuine about is I don't want to just say, well, people are getting rich, so they're never going to let this happen. And I agree with it, by the way. I do think that is people making money off this. Again, whether it's the chief diversity officer for the Fortune 100 company making whatever they're making, like there's that kind of money. There's the money for the think tanks that get to draft the laws and do this. Like there's
right.
an obscene amount of money that goes into this. And I don't mean obscene as like it's wasted. Just it's misguided, I think, in some places. That money can be used in much more effective, more beneficial ways. Anyhow, so aside from money, like we acknowledge that that's probably, I think you and I would agree that that's probably one of the major drivers, if not the major one. Aside from that, what would be, in your opinion, the next highest 1, 2, or 3 things, not money, but like money, that keep us from having these real conversations and keep us fixated on the things that we know are going to perpetuate? And in some cases, we specifically out loud say we're going to do this on purpose to perpetuate the same behavior again.
Yeah.
What do you think the top 1, 2, or 3 things are besides money that drive that?
Well, I think it's attention. I mean, you're going to get attention if you run to the latest example of bias. So that that's how you it's related to money, but it's also that's how you're going to get the attention of as many in society, because we love the car wreck.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of it.
I would argue for Ibram Kendi X, I think is his name.
Yeah.
Maybe ahead of money, maybe right behind money is his name was, for a few years was like everywhere. I would agree that attention's right up there.
Yeah, celebrity and fame. Yep. I mean, there's plenty of people whose entire lives and careers and everything about them was made on that. Yep. And so that's going to be, I mean, it's still a form of greed. So that's part of it.
So what else you got besides those 2 things?
The other one, I think, a big one is laziness. Because if we say there's problems in society, if we say, oh, it's just racism, boom, we don't have to deal with it anymore. We don't have to think about it. I'm not racist. It's just laziness. So I think that because a lot of these problems are challenging, like generational poverty. That's a challenging problem to solve. And if we just say, well, it's just racism, then we don't have to really deal with we don't have to do the hard work. So I think laziness is another very big part of that. As a society and as politicians and as people that would actually do something about it, I think that's a huge part of it too.
So it's kind of I think we talked about this a couple episodes ago, but kind of the American NIMBY, not in my backyard, also not my problem. If somebody else can deal with it, I don't have to. Like, hooray for me.
Right.
And if we just use the right word and absolve and say, well, it's racism, but I'm not racist, therefore it's not my problem to deal with, it's somebody else's problem. That would alleviate somebody having to do some pretty heavy lifting on this philosophical, intellectual, personal development, both individually and collectively. Like these are not minor things to overcome. These are very, very challenging, big things to overcome. And how we evolve out of our caveman, our what do they call it, the reptilian brain or whatever, or maybe even move back a couple of generations past that. This is hard work, and nobody wants to be saddled with that when they can be on their boat on the weekend instead.
Exactly. So I think that's a big part of it. I think the other big part of it is we want to belong to the righteous crowd. We want to be, we want to be part of the crowd that says the way this person is treated or the way these people have been treated is bad, and therefore I am good. I make myself feel good by being a part of the righteous crowd, and this is the righteous crowd.
If those dummies were like me, man, this problem would be gone. But I am like me, so it's not my problem.
Exactly.
And I can check the box. It's not my problem, and I can feel really, really righteous and smart all at the same time. Like that's like cocaine, man. That's like you don't get much better. And if you can make a buck and get your name in the newspaper, you could get like the
So much the
quadfecta.
better. Yeah, you're ticking all the boxes. Then I mean, you're at that point, you're just living the life.
Okay, so all kidding aside, Dave, those are 4 very powerful things. Is there anything else you think we're missing in that list? I think those are really, really strong. I'm not saying there should be more. There are more. I'm just asking, do you think there are any more?
I think those are the biggest drivers of what is power, money, belonging. Just, I mean, basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? All of those things is what drives all of these things to not be solved in a more authentic way. I mean, that's not to say that there is not progress. I think there is a lot of progress. There has been. I mean, I was born in the 60s, and we've made tremendous progress on all of these issues. And we've made societal progress on all of these issues as well. Just the general feeling because people have gotten to know each other better.
And I totally agree with you that individually, this problem is by and large, I'm not gonna say solved. There again, there's jerks everywhere. There's people who do horrific things to their neighbors and not even think twice. Okay, those exceptions aside, I mean that our society now versus 1865, 1943, like it's barely recognizable as
totally
far
different.
as like how we interact with each other. The other thing that I kind of hear folks go back to. Before I move on, if you think Dave and I missed something there, go to unsilentpodcast.com, find our social media channels. We want to hear about this. We want to hear where you think we missed it. Like this is a very important thing to us.
Yeah.
If you think we're overlooking something here, besides money and fame and laziness and what was the fourth one, Dave?
Belonging to the righteous crowd.
Yeah, that or and maybe the fifth one might be self-righteousness or whatever. Yeah. If you think we're missing something there and there's other really compelling reasons that we're not having these deeper questions, or conversations, or you think I'm asking the wrong deeper questions, like you think, hey, you're full of it, Brian. It really is. If there was no race differences in the entire globe, all of our problems would go away. We wouldn't argue about religion. We wouldn't argue about geography. We wouldn't argue about economics and things like that. If you think I've completely lost my mind or Dave has, let us know that too. So one of the things that well, 2 things. One is, my entire life I've heard that only certain kinds of people can be racist, and only certain kinds of people can be, the victims of racism. And again, going back to the very first thing we established, which was either we believe that we all have the same tendencies or we do not.
Right.
And I believe that we do.
Right.
I don't believe that one group of people, because of the pigmentation of their skin, do things differently. I do think there are cultural differences. I absolutely think some cultures are more open to things like, I don't know, cannibalism and slavery and things like that, and other cultures are not open to those things. And I think it has nothing to do with the pigmentation of their skin.
Right.
And I know I grew up with a kid. He lived in Hawaii much of his youth, and he was not a very popular kid in Hawaii because he was a white kid, and he experienced some of the things we're talking about that only other certain races are supposed to experience. I myself grew up in a couple parts of the country where there weren't very many folks that looked like me, and I did not have much fun at school. And I'm not comparing myself to what other, certainly not to what people a couple hundred years ago went through, or whether it's here or in the Middle East or whatever. I'm not comparing myself to that. But my point is, either we believe that people are all by and large the same, or we don't.
Right.
And I keep feeling us slide back into this. Yeah, but it's worse for this group than others. And yeah, but this group does it more often or worse or harder or whatever than others. Do you feel that, or is that just me? Like,
no, absolutely. And it's self-defeating. The problem is that if you set a standard for humans, if you set a standard for people, then that standard to be beneficial has to apply to all people. So you can't just say, and this is the fallacy of what the left mostly practices with this idea of saying that there are different standards for oppressed and oppressor, or by even creating those categories and saying you are inherently an oppressor or you are inherently oppressed. By doing that, you're robbing people of their essential humanity, robbing people on both sides of their essential humanity. And that's really where the big problem is. But that is also, you cannot really run a significant significant campaign for fundraising or for, power grabbing or for all of that without creating, especially creating that kind of dichotomy, especially in a society that has made so much progress on all of these
Yeah.
issues.
I think this is the one time, when I grew up, I did not think the same way I do now. I think this is the one topic that really got me to kind of, well, by societal standards now, I've completely gone from being what would have been considered a center left person not that long ago to now I'm like I'm like the hardest of hardcore conservatives. I think this is the topic that kind of got me looking at things in a different way because again, I grew up in the era of post Martin Luther King content of our characters, how we're supposed to be judged, and
Right.
and the finish line was nobody's judged for anything other than the content of their character,
Right.
which involves things like effort, caring for others, like self, governing your own behaviors, and
Right.
like that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
And now it's like, no, we've gone away from that. And the reason I mentioned it, I think it's the thing that helped me move politically to the degree that I have, which is not as much as some folks would say. But if you go back to like the Confederacy, that was folks who would be on the political left.
Right.
That spawned the KKK. That spawned Jim Crow, segregated water fountains, segregated bathrooms, segregated restaurants, segregated workspaces, and you fast forward, I don't know, 80 years,
Yeah.
and what do we find ourselves with again? Segregated workspaces, especially in colleges.
Yeah.
Places where some people are allowed and some people are not, specifically based on the race of their skin race. And again, it's the same underlying behavior. All we've done is chosen different heroes
Right.
and victims and villains and scapegoats. But it's the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing that led to the Native Americans being treated the way they were, because they were lesser than. And every person who treated them differently felt very righteous that they were doing the right thing.
Right.
Just like the people today.
And that is the problem is whenever you adopt, as we were talking about earlier, whenever you adopt the attitude that your fundamental principle is anger, retribution, hate, etc., and you're past looking more than future looking. We can learn from the past, absolutely, but we have to be focused on driving towards the future. If we focus on, I want to get back at these people for this stuff that happened in the past, as opposed to saying, what can we do to advance to the future? If there are disparities, let's look at how we help people to have such personal value and personal worth and personal ambition that they can overcome any obstacle, any disparity that's in front of them, any lack.
Or the ones that life and luck and their abilities will allow them to. Like
Yes.
this notion that everyone is supposed to be guaranteed to become a
outcomes.
billionaire.
Yeah.
That's I'm sorry.
Well, that's nonsense.
That's
It's
not
nonsensical.
reality.
Yeah, it's nonsensical because there's always going to be individual disparities because of, some people are taller, some people are shorter, some people are smarter,
Yeah.
some people, there's all of that type of stuff. But I think the fundamental principle is, if a movement is based on you can, then things are going to happen much better for the people that we're trying to help than the movement that says, no, society's against you, history's against you, all of these other things are against you. That's how we really solve it.
Right. Well, I think I agree with all that 100%. And I think we also start having basic conversations like, what does success look like? Is segregation of bathrooms and workspaces in colleges, is that what success looks like?
That's
And
ridiculous.
I don't know anybody who's not in a college or in a political office or in a industry funded by this who would say, yeah, that's a fantastic idea. Things were much better in 1942 in Selma. That's the way to go. Like, I don't know a single person who would say that.
Yeah.
And to be completely fair, you mentioned this last episode, and I know that there are people who are hurting, both people, not just people who have been victims. Of course, those people are hurting, but there's people who really passionately want to make this better.
Yeah.
But they find themselves overlooking these basic things we talked about. Like, we're all fundamentally the same
Humans
under our skin.
Yeah.
But these very good people, these very sweet, kind, well-intentioned people,
right,
find themselves sliding back into the, but if the European colonists wouldn't have done XYZ, we wouldn't be in this situation. As if it was Genghis Khan in 17 whatever or 1619, it would have been a different outcome. Like,
Right.
or if it was some if it would have been tribes from Africa coming here instead of people from Europe, like it would. This is what people do. What people do,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, and that's again, any solution is going to start with a recognition of what basic human culture and humanity is like, regardless of what part of the world they come from. That's always going to be the path to a solution, is understanding an honest appraisal of human condition.
Yeah, and I don't, to be really clear here, I'm not saying people do what people do as in check the box and forget it. That's not our problem. I'm saying just the opposite. I'm saying stop using these other superficial things as obstacles, and let's roll up our sleeves and do the damn work. Because if we don't, we're just forcing it upon our grandchildren. And what kind of loser would do that? Like, what kind of loser would hand their grandkids this where we're saying, yep, we 100% know we're setting you up to have the exact same thing happen to you, but a lot easier if I don't have to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. No, we need to, a generation is going to determine that we're going to overcome these things, I think, once and for all. Some generation is going to do that. I don't know if it's the next generation. I don't know if it's, a generation that comes out of disaster, but it's going to happen.
Well, if you look at the progress we've made over just the last, 500 years, I got to imagine. I'm all for. I'm hoping it's us. I'm hoping it's the next in my lifetime. I'm hoping it happens for sure. But if it doesn't, if the Ibram X's of the world get what they want, and we just kick this can down the road one more couple generations or whatever, I got to figure the next few hundred years we'll figure this out. I sure
would
hope
think so. Yeah, I would think so.
All right, Dave, is there anything else we left out of this conversation? This is not one of the ones that people look forward to having. I think
heavy topic.
Heavy topic for sure, that the stakes are so high. The stakes are high for people who have been victims of this stuff.
Yes.
And the stakes are high for people who try to talk about this and get it wrong.
Right.
And are absolutely crucified. So I appreciate you, Dave, taking the time to have this conversation and putting yourself in a situation where we're putting ourselves out there and we're trying to do the right thing, and we hope for the best, right?
And we hope for some feedback. Love to hear where we've got it right, where we've got it wrong. Love to hear what folks have to say about it. Go to unsilentpodcast.com. That's where you can tell us. Don't be shy.
Check out our social media platforms, Rumble channel, YouTube channel. Like Dave said, unsilentpodcast.com is where you can find that. Until next time, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.